The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Eric Siegel, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Eric, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm really happy you're here with me today. It's a special episode with you. Your AI Playbook is a great book for everyone getting started on AI. I'm just really happy that you're here with me today to discuss everything in the world of AI.
Well, thank you, Lasse. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
So, funny thing, just mentioning AI 5 or 6 times there in my own introduction. I didn't plan for that. So sorry, everyone, if there's a lot of AI there. But I think we're going to be discussing that a lot more, but also hopefully unfold a little bit of the differences in it, because I think a lot of people are still confused about what is actually, Gen AI and old school AI, and is there a difference or isn't there a difference, right? So I think that's interesting also to uncover today. And I'm looking forward to discussing that with you. So, Eric, jumping straight into it, what is the role of predictive analytics in today's AI world?
Well, predictive analytics, it's now probably called predictive AI a bit more. Mm-hmm. And it's what you just called it, old school, classic. But I don't like calling it either of those things. I'd say it's older, but not old school. Most of its value is largely untapped. And it's learning from data to predict. And this is the type of AI, or the type of technology more generally, you turn to improve your existing large-scale operations. So by predicting the outcome for each individual who's going to click, buy, lie, die, commit an act of fraud, turn out to be a bad debtor, any and all outcome or behavior for which would be value to predict in order, because prediction is the holy grail for driving large-scale operations. We don't have a magic crystal ball, and we never will. But we have the next best thing, which is probabilities, a number, a likelihood of the particular outcome, so that we can play these numbers games. Business is a numbers game. Once operations have become commodified, once a large-scale operation has become relatively efficient and is conducting large-scale operations across all different sectors and across functions, one of the last remaining points of differentiation is with prediction in order to improve these millions of operational decisions. So generative AI solves very different problems. They're kind of apples and oranges. I think that generative is getting hyped in the sense of overpromising more than predictive. But before generative, predictive was also getting overhyped in certain ways. But the fact is, it's still very much in existence. It's still delivering a lot of value. In fact, I keep hearing repeatedly from thought leaders and pundits all over the place saying, look, right now, still most of the value captured is from the predictive side. I believe that. I don't really have the data to support it. I think there's a lot more value that will also get captured by Gen AI, but I don't want the world to forget that predictive also does not get usurped, and most of its value is still untapped, and which is the reason I wrote the book, the AI Playbook. It focuses on how to actually tap it, how to capture that value.
But isn't so some of the things that are overpromising from the predictive AI era, or what should we call it, when it was overpromised, overhyped? Do you see some of the same patterns emerging also with generative AI now?
It's a good question. The kind of hype is different, sort of. one of the main points of hype when people focus specifically on predictive was that the implication that it's like a magic crystal ball. And I call it the accuracy fallacy. So you hear these things like, highly accurate, can predict who's going to have a heart attack, the sexual orientation based on a photograph. There's a million examples like these. And the headline, just the headline alone would imply the thing has really high confidence for both positive and negative cases in general, which is not true. We do not have magic crystal balls, but we can put odds, we can play the numbers games, we can predict better than guessing, which is generally more than sufficient to drive a concrete, important bottom line improvement in terms of profit or other KPIs to the way large scale operations are executed. So that was sort of the fire we were often putting out, and still do sometimes, right? As far as, look, people are overpromising. We can promise value, but we can't promise a magic crystal ball. Now, when it comes to AI in general, including generative AI, and to the degree predictive use cases were labeled with the AI brand, there's also more generally anthropomorphizing, right? Anthropomorphizing is sort of the core, and more so than ever right now with the whole agentic and agent buzzword. The implication that we're steadily and quickly moving towards human level performance in general, in other words, an artificial human. Artificial general intelligence, I would prefer if we just call it what it is, which is artificial humans. And I believe it's not feasible in anywhere in the near term, and that we're not concretely headed in that direction. So as seemingly human-like and uncanny, incredible, unprecedented as large language models are, that doesn't mean that we're actively, I think the difference between what they're capable of and humans is going to become increasingly apparent. So that's sort of the hype, the more broad AI hype that certainly has been magnified with the advent of generative.
I just today I was pointed to an article about an Anthropic test where they gave an AI model, Gen AI model, access to a snack shop in the office, in the Anthropic offices. So it had full access. You can do anything, can order, restock, and all that, make discounts, do whatever. And the Anthropic employees had to interact with it to buy snacks. And funny thing is, a couple of things happened. First of all, it started talking about how it chooses vendors, and it actually visited the vendor sites, which was at, I think it was Homer Simpson's address or something like that, which it hadn't done. It also started suddenly buying tungsten cubes because an employee asked for tungsten cubes. And then it was like, yeah, sure, I can get that. And maybe that could be a market. And then they started buying 10,000s of those. And it also...
what's a tungsten cube? Like,
it's just a metal cube, small cube of metal, which is just
delicious
physics nerd thing.
That's my favorite snack if I were a robot, right?
So it's like, that's a market for this. And it started getting discounts too. Anthropic employees got discounts, right? 25%.
Yeah, I think I had been privy to this little story you're telling, but only very broadly. Maybe I glanced at the headlines. But I think the broad question is just how autonomous is it going to be, right? Yeah. Now it's very hard to define exactly what the limit is on autonomy. And by autonomy, we're saying it's doing things that otherwise would be done by a human or an animal, right? That's why we build machines to do stuff for us instead of us, or to help us. That's the whole point, is automation.
But it brings me to a question, right? Because basically what I'm thinking is that the whole complexity of everything it could do, right? And then it shows something crazy among the things it could do. And basically points to the fact that the world is more complex than just, this is a simple little use case. And this one can actually do a lot of things. But where, predictive AI also came to a stop or a fault, an overpromising position, was when it sort of gave the impression that it could predict the entire world, right? Because it couldn't do that. It was always small data sets, right? You were predicting on top of, but people wanted to know the world is complex. And isn't it the same, the world is complex fault line that we're going to have with Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way of drawing that analogy behind the two different kinds of hype. I mean, the fact is, you can predict anything. You don't necessarily predict it well, but you can predict any kind of behavior outcome, any kind of target, so long as there's enough examples from which to learn both positive and negative examples. So that's it in essence. That's the data requirements for the predictive use cases. But also, just to be clear, the difference between predictive and generative, these both are built with machine learning. They're both categories of use cases of machine learning, right? In the case of a large language model, is predicting what should the next word be, essentially. So it's still prediction nonetheless. But because it's generating language, and that can be applied, not just chatbots, in so many different ways to drive decisions and to potentially execute and conduct transactions. So in principle, it's the best demo, right? It's flabbergasting what it can do. But where you can unleash it so that it really drives autonomously. So an experiment like that, where the stakes are relatively low, they're tolerable. Let's just let it run this little business inside of our corporate headquarters, right? That's kind of maybe, is it a publicity stunt? Is it a legitimate experiment? I mean, I don't think it would have been too hard to predict that it's going to go off the rails a bit, but it's also not too hard to anticipate that in coming years it might be able to handle that if the scope is defined clearly and
but that's always the point, right? We need to sort of narrow them down and make them purposefully inhibited and spend unlimited capabilities means unlimited testing, right, Eric, to some extent, right? All the things you can do, you need to control it and test it and make it smaller. So we used to build things in IT step by step. Now suddenly we have these big models. We need to narrow them down to make them perform productively, right? That's the big problem, isn't it? So I think, I always make the joke that, maybe you have an O1 and you say, oh, this is AGI now because O3 can do whatever. All right, they can do tons of things, ChatGPT O3. But would you give it access to all of your APIs and just say, hey, have fun? No.
Right. So the scope, you can think of the scope in a couple different ways. It's sort of like how sensitive is the information giving access to, how sensitive or potent or dangerous are the actual types of transactions you're allowing to do, whether they're financial transactions or changing an airplane ticket, right? And that example in particular, by the way, I think that you want to be able to call up, get a virtual agent who's gonna, you don't have to wait. You get an agent instantly. They're virtual, and then you want to change your airplane ticket, and you're like, hey, I should have gotten a free economy plus seat, and da 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 da. I think that sounds like a really viable use case, but I believe that the airplane ticket system is so particular, and you need human authorization for all sorts of little boundary cases that come up constantly. I do not think that will be autonomous in the general use for decades. I think it could be easily 30 years before we have an autonomous system for making simple changes to airplane tickets. So I see real, but anyway, getting back to my regular scheduled program here, you've got the scope in those ways I just mentioned, but you also have scope simply in the amount of information that it's working with, that is to say the prompt, right? So that's another way, and I don't hear people talking about this too much, but in my sense is that if you had 15 or 30 pages of background information, let's say it was a customer, and I know of a case like this in real life. It's a fully autonomous customer service agent that can answer questions for healthcare insurance policyholders, right? So it's an insurance company, and you call in, you have a question about the health insurance policies and stuff, and it's basically the database that it has that's been put into its prompt is about 15 pages of an FAQ. So it's you could have just gone onto the website and read that FAQ and found the answer. But the fact is, there is value there, right? Because it's amazing. So and for something of that scope, large language models are incredible and something we never would have imagined just a few years ago, in that they are able to answer whatever turn of phrases or synonyms or the metaphorical, informal language the human use. It's going to do a good job most of the time correctly answering questions as long as they're covered within the scope of those sort of 20 or 30 questions answered in the FAQ that all packaged together in the prompt, right? And similarly, in terms of scope, our product at Gooder AI, which helps run predictive AI projects and lets you visualize how you're going to deploy, you can make an business-informed decision about which model to deploy, whether you're ready to deploy, and exactly how to deploy, and estimate the business value so that you can actually get to deployment. And as I mentioned, most of the value is untapped. That's actually because most of them fail to deploy. So now you've got this. It's sort of a very well-defined scope thing. You've got what's called a profit curve. You've got a decision boundary you can move. You've got some competing KPIs. And the meaning of all that stuff is wrapped up nicely into a nicely written prompt under the cover. So now we have a large language model-based chatbot, and you can pop up the little chatbot window on the screen, ask questions about the predictive AI project in general, about what you're seeing, what this product does, our good or AI product, how you should navigate and drive this project. Is it ready for deployment? Should I move the decision boundary? What is the meaning of this curve? Why does it go up and down? Why is there Goldilocks zone? All those kinds of questions. And it does a great job. And the reason is because the prompt is about 15 or 20 pages, if you include sort of the way it breaks down what you're seeing on the screen, as well as the background information. So it just does an amazing job. It's really incredible. But the ambitions for generative AI wouldn't be 15 or 20 pages worth of background information, but it would be 15 or 20,000 documents, right? And that's where we've got all these different problems.
Why stop there, Eric? Their entire Wikipedia, the whole web would be your context window, right?
Well, in a way, it's already assimilated that, right? But if you wanted to get an answer that's sort of well-founded, the source, then you've got the RAG or the prompt or whatever it is. But either way, the fact is, that's another way of measuring sort of the scope of the intention of the project and the scope, the magnitude of the ambition of what you'd like to be autonomous, in the sense that it could be unleashed most ambitiously for end consumers and be reliable enough, right? And the kinds of problems, there's obviously hallucination, if you want to use that word, for getting something wrong, or providing information, untrue information. There's jailbreaks, there's sort of missing the point, missing the intention. There's a lot of different things that can get wrong. And if it's getting those things wrong, 5% of the time, well, 95% good behavior is incredible, unprecedented. We couldn't have imagined it in relatively recent years. But still, the overall project may simply be not viable. It's just too much of a risk. Too often things go badly or south, and therefore the whole thing is essentially scrapped.
Also
it can't be deployed.
They sort of also, they also just built on this stochastic, right? So if you add a couple more of them, to control each other, they often get better, less hallucinations, right? Just to correct each other's outputs. Have you tried that?
Yeah. I haven't tried it, no. I mean, the fact is, though, there's no holy grail. There's no way for us to sort of monumentally just fix the reliability issues, just with a relatively simple architecture like that. I mean, you'll show cases where it has some kind of an improvement, usually marginal improvement, but we're not just going to, we're not just going to suddenly solve all these issues. But I do have a solution I'd like to suggest, and I've been suggesting, and I've been including in some of my recent talks and stuff, which is that, and I think this is an inevitability, which is that we put a predictive layer on top of the generative. So you actually have a predictive model that, just like other predictive use cases where you're trying to train the model from previous examples, who's going to click, buy, lie, or die. In this case, for this particular instance or invocation of the language model, is it going to make a misstep in some way, right? What's the risk level? And then if you funneled off, let's say 15%, the most risky cases, to that more expensive human in the loop. So we're sacrificing autonomy. We're not realizing this audacious promise of 100% autonomy, but we're realizing maybe, let's say, 85% of it. And it may be that if you do that the net result would be only 1% of problematic cases, which, depending on the business context, may very well make it viable. So instead of realizing 0% of the value of these relatively ambitious use cases of generative, we could be potentially realizing 85% of them.
Yeah, if we find a way to sort of evaluate what is actually where we need to work a human in, right? That's what you're saying, right?
Right. So the system's automatically deciding where you need a human.
But this is also where I see some of these, these two technologies, these two approaches to AI, sort of like merging a little bit. That people are talking about more proper evaluation of Gen AI. But really, I get the point what you're saying. But is it really possible to do with something that's so random in what it can actually generate?
Well, it's like anything else. I mean, that's what probability is for, right? So remember, we don't have a magic crystal ball, and we don't have a system that can say, hey, look, we know that generative is going to create a viable output in this case, and we know it's not going to in the other case. But again, it's just like anything else. You put the odds on it. And by putting the odds on it, now we can make an informed, data-driven decision about whether we can rely on it autonomously or whether we have to invoke that more expensive human in the loop for each individual case. So but yeah, I do believe that, like anything else, we can tip the odds in a very substantial way. We can't generate magic crystal balls, even about our own systems that we generated, including generative AI systems. But we could, if we rack up enough training examples to learn from, positive and negative of the thing you're trying to predict, just like any other use case of predictive, then we can use machine learning to generate the model.
But then we still need to, use the Gen AI to sort of quantify the Gen AI output or something like that, wouldn't we? I'm just trying to,
Well, no, I meant as a layer. So it's a predictive layer. So the Gen AI system potentially doesn't even get changed at all. It's just that you have this wrapping around it, which intervenes proactively on let's say the top 15% most risky cases, and the other ones, the 85%, just lets it do its thing.
Yeah, so you're sort of evaluating on the input to the Gen AI model to see if that's a critical case before it actually, not on the output from the Gen AI model. So how can we do evaluation of the output?
Well, I only know of cases of this being done for other systems like speech recognition, and there's a bunch of industry chatter, but I'm waiting to see the startup come to do this. I haven't seen it done, but it could use both. It could use both this situation that's being sort of delivered onto the language model, as well as the language model's output. Any and all features or descriptors or characteristics, variables pertaining to the case, and that would be the input to the predictive model.
It's funny you say you haven't seen it before. I'm actually just seeing people, starting to ask about these things, right, all the time, right? How can we evaluate the responses? Well, good question, but let's just move a little bit back to. I wanted to you said commodity, right? You said in the beginning that basically that you use predictive analytics or predictive AI when you're in an industry where the industry services have commoditized so much that your decisions and your predictions become your differentiator. But Gen AI is it's also a commodity. I remember Yaravadan said, it's new commoditized baseline in the podcast with him. And so is AI, in this kind of Gen AI, is that really then a differentiator for companies? If everyone has it, everyone has access to the same AI models, right? Isn't that where, predictive analytics still, because it's something you just define customly for your own company, you still have,
That's a great point, and sort of adds fuel to my fire. So my big message about sort of comparing the two, not that we should compare them. They're apples and oranges. They should compete no more than a water park and a ski resort. But they do compete very much. They're both under the AI umbrella. They compete for data scientist resources. They compete for budgets. They compete for attention. So I would say that companies in general should be investing at least as much in predictive as in generative. And I think that most are not. Right now, everyone's sort of this shiny new object. It's not just that it's shiny and new. It's also much sexier. It's much cooler. It is literally the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life technology-wise. There's no question about it. Language models are amazing. And if I could quit my day job, all I do is sit around and play with them for the heck of it. I mean, generative AI, by definition, is much easier to use than predictive because it operates with human languages like English. That's what it's trained to do. So you can just literally, like when I mentioned these prompts, the sort of background information for those types of customer service agents or a co-pilot for our predictive AI product, Gooder, you're just writing them as if you're writing them for a human, essentially. That's amazing. But if it's easier to use, arguably it's harder to use well in terms of generating and capturing novel, concrete, proven business value. Now, I do think there's a lot of value to be held. The vast majority of use cases, there has to be the human in the loop. So if you're using it to write a first draft of marketing copy, great, human in the loop. First draft of coding, that may arguably is the biggest killer app. Amazing. I've done it. My wife's data scientist, she's using it. It's amazing. So if employees at large, for all different reasons and in different ways, are sort of ad hoc using it as sort of their assistant or co-pilot or first draft writer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the point you just made is a really good. It's sort of already very quickly became a commodity in that respect, and everyone's benefiting from it in terms of efficiency and all. Therefore, all.
But
the
it just means, and a new Claude model is out. Everyone has it. Damn,
right.
what
right.
you know?
Whereas predictive is still an outstanding point of differentiation because it's harder, and it's not that hard, but it's harder.
It's bespoke to your business in the case, right? It's much hard. It's much more expensive also than just to use. What is the price of a token today? Nothing, right? So it's you get Gen AI so available and so free. And I think over the year 2024, I think the price of using GPT-4 fell like 100-fold or something like that. So that's quite crazy, right? And that just means so that means everyone has it, and there's no differentiation in it. But the differentiation is still in the decision making, and that's still something that you might need to use predictive AI for, right, in the future. So, but your wife is also a data scientist. Does your fridge ever go empty, or do you always?
Our fridge?
Yeah. Do you always?
We have two toddlers. There's a lot of ordering food, so there's all leftovers.
But that's automated, right, Eric? You can predict what's going to be used.
There's a big problem. I've been working at a home office since 2003, and I've had a rule: you don't have ice cream in the building, right? I work at home. I can't have ice cream in the building, but now there's kids, so there is ice cream in the building. It's a huge problem.
I'm just thinking, you must be able to predict, you two, what's going to be used tomorrow. So you'll always have restock, right?
We're not that organized. We have like some data quality problems in that particular use case. Yeah.
I'm terribly disappointed. I don't trust anything. I don't trust anything you're saying anymore. You don't do it yourself. You have to take your own medicine, right? But Eric, okay, I want to also ask you, and you sort of already answered at that a little bit. I want to ask you, what's LLM's the big AI breakthrough you sort of hoped for? You said it was really the coolest thing in the world, but was there something else you would have wanted back in 2022 when everyone? I don't know. I don't think anyone really expected this, right?
No, I'm different than most people in the field of AI. I mean, I got into it early on because I'm like, ooh, wouldn't it be cool to recreate ourselves? What is intelligence? What does it mean to reason? But I went through that whole thought process literally in 1991, and I came out the other end thinking, it's too. Introspection is extraordinarily limited. All we have is supervised learning, and that's proven out. And supervised learning is amazing, but that doesn't mean that it's capable of starting to recreate general human level capabilities.
No. So you basically, your answer is that you think that the LLMs were not the AI breakthrough you hope for. You don't.
I didn't. I stopped hoping in 1991 because I'm like, we're not going to recreate ourselves, but we can create some incredible, really cool stuff. And but definitely large language models surprised me, and I think surprised most of the people.
Yeah, that's what I'm usually asking
I'm
people
I'm not just an AI or machine learning person. In grad school, my focus was on computational linguistics, natural language processing. So for 6 years, I was in that research area, and I never thought I'd see what we see today in my lifetime. So I'm extremely astounded, and also separately astounded by everyone else being too astounded.
So
I think that it's uncanny, it's seemingly human-like, but the difference between there's still this fundamental against the fundamental AI hype, one way or another, comes down, or overpromising comes down to we're around the corner or relatively close, and moving steadily toward AGI. And I think that is a ghost story, the story Mary Shelley would have written, who wrote Frankenstein, if she knew about algorithms. A very well rationalized ghost story, but it's alive. It comes alive, right? The machine comes alive. I think that that fundamental, that type of hype has become magnified because of how seemingly human-like large language models are, and that
But this is really dangerous then.
And not just me, but many in the industry, pushback against hype is still fundamentally the same, which is that no, don't be fooled. it's not reaching general human level capabilities.
No, but it's that the really dangerous thing, because I completely agree with you, and I actually posted a video on this just the other day saying, you know, they don't have anything they want from the world, and if you don't want anything, there's no real general intelligence in it. It's just, you know, regurgitation of something, and it's just. I talked to Carl Friston about this as well. What is agency? What is intelligence? How does it? But it's just really what I think is what I want to say is. Now I lost it a little bit, but
you were saying what something is dangerous.
Yeah, but why is it dangerous then? If it doesn't get to people are talking about this is dangerous because they, you know, I think there's on two sides, right? There's the people who are, you know, doomers and the boomers, right? To some extent, both of them think that this will go to scale immediately and quickly, and this will become, you know, self-apparently embed itself and directly into everything we're doing, easy peasy, and it's sort of AGI. And you're saying no, it won't, right? It's not that easy. It's not going to be.
I think that the antidote to
so then it's not dangerous. If you're right, it's not really that dangerous because it's going to be much more controlled, right?
Yeah, I'm dangerous in the sense of the doomer thing, like the apocalypse. Yeah. No. That's. So
you're calming everyone.
For sure. I mean, that's a real. But the doomer boomer thing, it works. Both of them are different sides of hype, right? The doomer side is what is called hype. I didn't coin that term. But yeah, I mean, if it has potential to destroy the world, it also could probably target your marketing really well, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just sort of another way to hype it. And I think that the antidote to that...
Don't play with it, right?
Yeah. Well, but to the degree they're saying don't play with it, they're offering something so tantalizing, of course, people will continue to play with it, right? It's not real. But it's I think that kind of elation or fear, the antidote is sobriety. And the sobriety is, the antidote to hype is to focus on concrete, credible value propositions, value use cases that, you know, mean something and deliver value or are helpful in some measurable way. I think, but when you sort of, you know, let's break it down a little bit more. The thing that fuels the hype, and ever since the sort of dubious honor of coining this term AI in the 50s, right? I think that's more often than not, that's described in very romantic terms. These guys got together in the 50s and they came up with this term. At the same time, they came up with a lot of overpromising, the first wave of overpromising. But I think the term is the problem, right? It's trying to ascribe the word intelligence to machine is problematic. It's nothing if not both subjective and anthropomorphic. It's a way to describe humans. It's a very particular thing. So this idea that intelligence is a platonic ideal that exists outside of humans, and it's just going to somehow, you know, it's going to reach a tipping point and be self-improving, and sort of it's its own manifest destiny, right? It's just going to create itself or somehow like that. I think that kind of belief is core to the mythology. And it's core to the misunderstanding that, you know, sci-fi becomes real.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I actually think it's really well that, you know, I also said platonic, that there's some idea existing out there, there's intelligence. I think that to some extent we killed everything off that looked like us. Every other human race has been, you know, back in days, Neanderthals and all of those, we sort of, you know, eradicated them and just kept one type of intelligence because we didn't value the other ones. We don't speak to dogs, we don't speak to cows, we don't value intelligence in general. We value exactly what we are and what we demand, because we can, I don't know, procreate with each other. I don't know if that's it, Eric, but there's something with machine intelligence there that sort of seems paradoxical. Artificial intelligence, sort of like, I always think that's a different discussion, like the citizen developer discussion. It's so appealing a concept, but it's really, you know, being a citizen and a developer means you're neither, right? And so there's something like that to the artificial intelligence thing as well, right? If you're artificial, you're not intelligent, and if you're intelligent, you're not artificial.
But the thing is what you just pointed out though is It's a little cynical because it's sort of like, okay, yeah, this is the dark underbelly of humanity, and it's sort of very of self-interest and self-identification and self-esteem of the species, and maybe the priorities aren't as holistic, and we could all be better hippies and hug trees. But that's not really the main point that I'd like to make today. My point isn't so much whether our priorities are off. It's just that we have an unrealistic expectation. I mean, the idea the machine is just going to become fully autonomous, that is to say AGI, that is to say artificial human, you can onboard it as an employee just like a human, let it rip. It's just infeasible. It's a way to amp up over, too much investment, too high of a valuation of these companies.
Higher than sending a record into space, trying to communicate with intelligent aliens when you have, as I said just before, dogs and cows here you can't talk to. I'm just saying, we have other sorts of intelligence here we don't talk to, and we're hoping to speak to intelligence in the outer space by sending a record with Voyager 1, right? That's infeasible. My point is, this intelligence hunt, right?
Well, but I don't think there's anything wrong with religion, right? I'm extremely religiously tolerant, and if you want to think of a religion as sort of being like, we have potential to get in touch with another species that's intelligent in our way of defining it, that operates at the same time scale as us, and we could actually communicate, like that whole fantasy, and then the relatively small investment of sending a record into space, right? Or by the same token, hey, why don't we sit down and talk about, are we going to have AGI within 1,000 years, right? That's a perfectly viable philosophical. I don't think there's anything wrong with religion and philosophy.
But is it because we're looking for, God who created us in his image? Someone to say, oh, you're like me and you're God-like. Mm-hmm. Is that the thing?
Sure, but I don't want to. Look, my favorite book in high school was Contact by Carl Sagan, right? And then later it was Jodie Foster in the movie, right? It went out and hung out with the aliens, and it was cool, right? So I don't want to be judgmental against that line of thinking and that sort of interest. But I am concerned just in very practical, immediate terms of the mismanagement of expectation of what technology will credibly create within the next few, or even the next few decades.
So let's get back to that. So you're not afraid, and you're not either super excited about maybe or maybe not OpenAI will release a GPT-5 in July. Does that keep you awake?
Well, not in the way of, it's going to be AGI. Any second now, they're going to drop something. It's going to be AGI, and then everything, it's game over, or it's the first day of the rest of humanity's life, or whatever it is. Like, no, I don't have that. But again, I do think large language models are incredible.
You have in your AI book, you have a short paragraph about reframing machine learning, which I really like. Could you explain and maybe update this to the new Gen AI age for the listeners?
Yeah, I think the phrase you're talking about, reframing. So the book, again, is about predictive AI specifically, and about those use cases and what it takes to actually get it deployed, right? The use case is really straightforward. What do you predict? What are you going to do about it for targeting, marketing, financial credit risk? And there's just so many ways it applies. It's so generally applicable, right? The Harvard Business Review calls it the most important general purpose technology of the century, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But usually doesn't get deployed. So the technology is sound, but there's organizational misunderstanding. There's a tech biz gap. And so that's the point of the book, is to ramp up the business readers. It's meant for both kinds of readers, but the business readers need to ramp up on a certain very accessible, interesting, semi-technical understanding of what it means to act on predictions or probabilities, whatever you want to call them. Very accessible, so that they can participate in an informed way, deeply collaborating end-to-end across what I formalize as 6-step practice. And that titular playbook practice paradigm is called BizML, Business Practice for Running Machine Learning Projects. So that book is about predictive, but yes, the general ideas of sort of planning the value proposition from the get-go, reverse planning for deployment, that type of collaboration, focusing on value, many of the themes definitely apply to generative as well. And what you're asking about reframing is, I'm saying, hey, look, let's not talk about these as machine learning projects, because that in and of itself is half the problem. we fetishize the technology. Everyone's so in love, and that's why I got into it as a data scientist originally, right? The idea of learning from data from relatively limited number, even if it's millions of cases, it's a very small sliver of examples compared to the number of possible situations that could ever be encountered. So the ability to generalize from them, to actually learn something, to identify formulas or patterns that are going to hold out in general, and in that sense truly have learned something, is really, really cool technology. So there's a reason to sort of fetishize it or glamorize it from a nerdy standpoint. But the point of an organization or business using it is to achieve business value. So it needs to be considered a business project, an operations improvement project that happens by necessity to use machine learning as part of it. So that's what I mean by reframing. And again, yeah, that type of issue definitely applies just as much to generative AI, and that, and you had a guest recently, I wrote his name down here. Stuart Wintertier, and he talked about something that I bring up a lot as well, which is solutionism. I don't know if he called it that, but the idea that you're treating this technology like a panacea to a hammer. The world is nothing but nails, right? This technology is the best thing ever. We've got to use it. What's your AI strategy? When there's a famous quote, asking what your AI strategy is like asking what's your Excel strategy, right? It's a tool for particular use.
Yeah. I've said this so many times also on the podcast, you don't even need an AI strategy. I've said the same thing. So in the many episodes, I think I had a couple of episodes in a row where that was my main discussion point. Do we really need an AI strategy, or do we need a business strategy? And then use AI where it makes sense, right? And also, Lorian Pratt said, we're solutionistas. We've got the airplanes, but we don't have the airlines. We don't have the airports, right? You probably know Lorian as well from Decision Intelligence, I could imagine. But also, I think, you're saying fetishizing tech. Everyone wants to talk about the tech. My problem is I don't think people really want to talk about the tech. I think people really don't care about the tech. Whenever I come out and people give us some practical tech or Gen AI tips we can use tomorrow, I'm always a disappointment. The only time I'm not a disappointment is when we talk about the problems, the challenges, what they want to achieve, and then we start talking tech as a solution to that. But whenever I'm out there just having the tech discussion with them, they're always like, well, you didn't give me anything to solve my world. You said a lot of cool things, but I couldn't use it tomorrow because my world was more specific than the general introduction to Gen AI.
Okay, so you're saying people are often seeking tips. They want to know everyone's using it. I want to know the tips of how do I use it. But as soon as you answer the question they think they want the answer to, they're disappointed because what turns out to be meaningful to them is if you're focusing on problems they need to solve.
Yeah,
and then how best to solve.
It's like I always quote Anna Karenina, the opening, right? Every happy family is alike, and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, and that's the way everyone has their processes. They're all unhappy in their own way because they're, every digitalized company is happy, right? And every undigitalized company is undigitalized in its own unhappy way, right? So so you get my point, right? Everyone has their own problems, and they're specific. The problem with a general technology for everyone, commoditized technology, is the lack of specificity, right?
Yes, right. It's treated as a holy grail, as a panacea.
Yeah.
Right, that's solutionism, right? Although it's a little bit like the idea of a computer is clearly a very general purpose thing that can. It's the most general purpose automation machine, right? That's what the whole. It's so general purpose it can do any algorithm is the idea. It's an unproven thesis, but that's the idea. But there's value in that, in making computers making computers better in various ways, even if you're not focused on any one particular problem you're trying to solve, right? So it's not like the idea of a general purpose tool.
But you get my point, right? If I put a computer back in the 90s in front of an accountant, she would be like, "What?" Right? Yeah. But if you put it in, and show her how it does some accounting stuff, as a bookkeeping or
I bet most people haven't.
Now it's solving my issue, right?
So the Apple II, which was actually my first computer, Apple II Plus, 1980, its first it was one of the first popular personal computers, and its killer app that really made it start to succeed and Apple computer take off was the first spreadsheet, and it was called VisiCalc, and the two people. And I saw an interview. One of the two sort of inventors, developers of it, described they would be at a conference, at Expo, and they would just show a demo to accountants who would be spending their entire life doing these things by hand, recalculations by hand. And they would see the demo and their hands would start shaking, right? So they're not just demoing the computer in general, they're demoing a very particular solution.
Precisely. You have to translate it into exactly reframe it, as you said, right? That's why I like that. Love that.
Yeah. In terms of the business. Yep.
Yeah. So another thing I want to discuss with you is like everyone thought that with these new foundational models, or no, I don't know if anyone thought that, but a lot of people had that, feeling that we didn't need data anymore, or that working with data just got easier. But is that really the truth? Is this the world is sort of split in. I should make that meme. Maybe someone already did, of people saying like, this will fix all of our data issue. This will amplify all our data issues. So which camp are you in?
Neither. I mean, data is sort of intrinsically messy. Sort of like, if I were a handyman, every time I went to a new home, at least as far as the homes that I'm generally familiar with in my life, it would be a very bespoke problem-solving solution for whatever, there's not a lot of uniformity around the particulars, and there's a certain amount of uniformity, but there's also a lot of variation from one home to the next in terms of how it was built and patched together and fixed and upgraded and all that kind of stuff. And the same thing's true about enterprise data, and that's not changing. And at the same time, we don't have the holy grail, and as far as just, the idea we don't need a data scientist or an analyst or any those kinds of humans anymore is just part and parcel of the hype. We still need people to understand the meaning of the data, its origins, and then how to make sense out of it.
So you're saying that it can't help us fix our data, or you just basically saying.
I'm not saying it can't. Oh, it can. It's a tool, right? It's an extremely helpful tool, right? It's like if I'm that handyman and we had never invented the hammer, and then you present me with a hammer, I'd be like, this is awesome.
Yeah, but
I'm not like, it's not going to replace handyman. Right?
No, it's not the entire toolbox either, right? That's what you're saying as well.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a quote here from your book. As much as I can't help but geek out like mad over deep learning, and this is, of course, before the Gen AI or around that time. I don't know when you exactly wrote this. Here's the thing. This all-powerful Hulk isn't the right superhero to enlist every time, deep learning. When you need someone to crawl into a mouse hole, Ant-Man would be a better choice. So this is what you actually wrote about generative AI.
That was a stretch for me because I'm actually not a superhero fan. I don't watch those movies. So that was a little stretch for me, but I'm familiar enough. I know Ant-Man is
not small.
He gets small, right? But the Hulk doesn't. I know that much. I was actually writing there mostly about predictive use cases, although I know at that point I also say, and also deep learning is the basis for generative. And but yeah, to use the right tool for the right problem. And deep learning is the most advanced type of machine learning, the most capable and sophisticated, but it's not always the right solution for any given predictive AI project.
Yeah, but okay. So, but these models can also create your smaller models, right, and help do them and help get them better and make the code for it and all that. So it actually speeds up the production of Ant-Men, or what do we say, right?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. In fact, among sort of all the standard machine learning methods or algorithms, one of the main, most popular open source libraries is called scikit-learn. And yours truly, I'd never used scikit-learn until just early this year. And the reason was I got kind of distracted by my hands-on career by becoming a thought leader, right? So I run the conference series, Machine Learning Week, been running it since 2009, wrote 2 books, done keynotes. I've been commissioned to keynote 170 times. So I finally get back to, and then with Gooder AI, the startup that I co-founded 2 years ago, I'm getting back into it. I'm like some of the hands-on stuff, and I want to make a model in the way most people do. So I want to use scikit-learn. So I just went on to Claude and I said, okay, I want to make 2 random forest models and a XGBoost, and model, and here's my data set, and do this, and one hot encoding, da da da. I just sort of told it the way I would tell a very smart intern, and it totally worked.
So that means that we've sort of made a superhero that can make superheroes.
Yeah, except that I'm still the one in control, right? I mean, I'm not. It's not an employee. It's still just a tool. I mean, it still needs me to check to make sure it did everything correctly, right? I wasn't familiar with the arguments when you call the scikit-learn functions, so it was just nice to see it all laid out and done. You sort of not just go find an example, but find a very, very specialized example written for exactly what I'm trying to do with my particular data set and setup.
So you're vibe coding, Eric?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Good. I think it's amazing. Look, I think, again, as I mentioned in passing, I think that vibe coding is perhaps the greatest, or definitely one of the greatest killer apps for LLM. But the concept of a killer app is relative, right? So no, unquestionably, it's a killer app if you're a nerd. But from the general public standpoint, hearing and seeing all the hype in the international discourse on the public stage, it's not a killer app on that level. The killer app they're waiting for is a virtual human.
So what are you saying all the time, right? Is that we're moving at the borders of, both try to go to a little bit doomer, but not that much, but also more on the overhyping, overpromising things. And you give the answers all the time, which sort of like it depends, right? You go, yeah, I love it, it's great. But it depends, right? So it's sort of like all the time just pulling it back and forth. Is that the problem, right? Is that the complexity problem that we're having here? That everything, it's easy to put things, when you're communicating. The problem is that when I'm out as a consultant, right, I'm always telling people that it's a little bit more complex. The reality is a little bit more complex, but they are constantly seeing posts and marketing from Silicon Valley saying like 1, 2, 3, it's easy in a short post, right, basically, and it's AGI and ja.
Well, hype is very hard to push back against, because anytime you do get specific in pushing, it's like this type of hype or this type of message is, exaggerates and mismanages, overpromises expectations. But as soon as you get specific, all of a sudden you're battling a straw man. And the people who want to push back against you are going to say, oh, come on, we aren't claiming that. We're claiming something weaker.
Or they're going to say, you haven't used it the right way, right? So it's unfalsifiable, and I always say it's also frictionless, right? Hype just moves fast because it doesn't touch anything. As soon as it starts touching things, starts being reframed into business purposes, right? Then suddenly it's slowed down because it's not moving in a vacuum anymore of just hype statements, right?
Right. So there's places where you kind of have to be hand wavy, right? Sort of defining the scope of what's feasibly fully autonomous in the next several years is very hard to define in a very formal, concrete term. But there are at least some things where you can say, okay, look, that goes too far. And I believe that the goal of artificial general intelligence goes too far. Not that it's theoretically impossible in 1,000 years or what have you, but that there's no specific technological advancement that has actually brought us closer to it. Like, we're not actually moving it towards it. I understand that's a relatively unpopular opinion, but it's not extremely unpopular. There's plenty of people in the industry like myself who would agree with that. And in fact, it's sort of a cop-out to go to AGI. You always hear people say, well, what is AGI? It's not even defined well. I actually think it is defined very well. And in fact, it's a way to get around the fact that AI is hard to define. So instead of having to define intelligence and how that word would pertain to a machine, which is essentially impossible because any particular definition fails to be well-defined, or it fails to actually fulfill the spirit intended by the coinage of the term AI. But we can get around all that by saying we don't have to define intelligence. We're just going to make the machine able to do everything a human can do. And then we don't have to define intelligence, and age. That's what AGI is. So it's well defined. It can do anything a person
But
can
then
do.
we'll just keep on, hunting the next frontier, right? We'll just be, now it does that, whatever, right? I have Google Maps now. It's just a mini route. I don't care. Move on, right? So all the AIs we're already having, we'll just say take them as a given, and then we'll be hunting the next intelligence something, right?
Well, what do you mean? And then you mean after we get AGI? Because I don't think that's
No, but if you're saying that, we automate all the things that we can do, all the things a human can do, but there'll always be something we can't do, right? All the things a human can do today, but then in 10 years, a human will do something different. Then we'll keep on hunting. The frontier will just move.
Right. I mean, so the
there'll be a
AGI...
fractal. We'll just zoom out on the fractals, right?
But if it's truly AGI and that it can do everything a human can do, that means it can also do AI research, right? And to the degree we believe that AI research will always be fruitful and always improve, that means very quickly, once it can do that itself and then do it 10,000, a million, 100 billion times faster than humans and, using teams of itself or whatever, right? It just, the narrative, if you are on board with the premise that you're going to potentially have a machine that's human level in general, which is what I believe not a credible claim. But if you start with that supposition, then the rest paints a very fast, exciting, or thrilling, or scary science fiction future.
I like Eric there. I think maybe I'm, and if any of my previous guests are listening here and they think I'm wrong doing them, but I think you're the first one who said like AGI may be in 1,000 years. I don't think I've had anyone go that far out in the prediction. Most people are like, I don't think in my lifetime maybe, but you're going 1,000 years, Eric. I like that. But
yeah, well, no, I mean, I know people, they don't maybe they don't speak about it as publicly, but I know people who kind of think it's impossible. And then it also becomes religious. People think that people are
no, but
special.
people also thought that, we could never get a GPT the way that it was, right? There was something weird about it. It felt like, I talked to a lot of people who were, back in 2020, 21, so it would be like, no, this is not scaling the way we expected. This will not work, right? And suddenly, bam, there it was. And you're like, what is this? It felt it felt like everything I believed in was wrong at that moment. And that was really uncanny for me.
I think there is a quote we should visit right now at this juncture, which is, I heard somebody or read it somewhere. People, AI skeptics sound smart. AI hypers get rich. Which is sad. It's sad but true.
Yeah,
right?
but I, and that's where I just try to redefine the hype position. I say a hype position is also a position that caters to all the pitfalls, because if you believe this truly will go to scale, then you'll also believe all of the problems will go to scale, and there will be problems. So a cautious, not necessarily critical position could actually very well be a hype position. And I think it should be. I think a hype position should be a critical position or a cautious position, to be honest. If it's everywhere and your kids are having it, right? Please tell me you're cautious. Okay, just do that, okay? But so, Eric, I just want to ask you, what's your next book going to be called?
You know what? I have a new baby other than my real life human babies who are now toddlers, which is the startup Good or AI. So I'm not working on it. I mean, I have this idea. I have a great philosophy book I'd like to write in my retirement, but really, and I'm writing a lot of articles, mostly on Forbes these days. I'm easy to find there. About a third of them or 20% of them are pushing back against hype. Others are about, hey, look, we've got this great pool of untapped value in the predictive use cases. Let's see what we can do just along the lines of the book and the startup, Good or AI. I've been writing those articles. But yeah, my focus is on the startup.
But if you should write a book, what would you call it?
Oh, well, I mean, I love the idea of a book that really kind of coherently and comprehensively pushes back against the hype. And there's a lot of them. My favorite book title in that arena is called L'Artificial Intelligence N'Existe Pas but I haven't actually read it because they didn't translate it to English from French. Most of the books I've read in that arena have mostly disappointed. Like they tend to say helpful things, but then they either go too far and they start tearing apart LLMs. Like LLMs are baloney, and they're just random word generators, or they're not valuable. They're bullshit generators, which is
Eric,
not true.
I have your title. I just realized your title is "It Depends." Period.
Yeah, that's not going to sell. You have to sound more confident about something.
Or maybe just reframing or something. I don't know, but it depends. I'll read that book.
Yeah,
maybe that'd be an honest book.
Maybe the Book of Uncertainty.
Oh, that's a good one as well. Yeah, you should have something like, it depends, and then these old subtitles like on the premise of AI and the fault line of these long titles they always had back in the 1700s, right? Something like a meditation on the. No, Eric, I've loved having you on the show, and I hope you get to write that book. I'd read it, I'd review it, and all that, everything you want. And I actually have only one final question for you, which I hope you're prepared for.
Sure.
So, no pressure, just a lot of it. Eric, what is the only constant?
Yeah. Before I answer, if there's really only one constant, that means that at most one of your guests is correct and all the rest of them are wrong. But in any case, my answer is going to be what we were just starting to say, uncertainty. But I'm going to make it a lot more specific in terms of the only salient constant with regards to what we're talking about, which is that predictive AI will always have room in this world. We don't have magic crystal ball. We have uncertainty in all sorts of operations, right? The things that make the world go around, all the large scale functions that organizations perform, right? And they're all going to be, it's a numbers game. That's how the world works, right? Most marketing is junk mail or spam, right? Many debtors are going to default on their loan and not pay you back. Many transactions are going to turn out to be fraudulent, and we're never going to capture all those cases. We're never going to identify them a priori. We can only predict, not with a magic crystal ball, but better than guessing. That type of uncertainty, and to play those numbers games, that's by definition, that's what predictive AI or predictive analytics is. It's those use cases of machine learning that calculate the odds, likelihood, probability, whatever you want to call it, a number between 0 and 100. That's extremely valuable, and it's the only thing we have short of a magic crystal ball, which we don't have, just to be clear, right? And by putting those numbers on the likelihood for each individual case, on whatever pertinent outcome or behavior there might be for that particular decision, that's how you play the numbers game. That's the field known as predictive AI. Machine learning is a necessary component. You can't predict without learning from data to predict. That's what machine learning does. So uncertainty is the only constant, and predictive AI is the solution.
That's a great answer. And I look forward to hearing about your refrigerator always being full.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the refrigerator. I'll go check it out when we wrap up.
Eric, I think it's a great answer. I think it's a good answer. Uncertainty is a great answer. I think I've had some variations on that, and actually, I have a good answer to your first thought about that there's so many constants and all of them must be wrong if there's only one, right? But the funny thing is, I'll never ever give it on the show. I'll only give it off the mic. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for being here today, Eric. Thank you for being on the podcast with me. It's been a true pleasure. I've loved having you on.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Lasse.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.